resilience today, and this is all part of a task force looking at energy, climate, and conservation, and trying to chart an agenda or put an agenda together for next year where we can aggressively hit the ground running and address these issues. When we talk about energy, of course, I think one of the top issues that comes up with people across the country is affordability to energy, access to energy, whether that's gasoline, electricity. It's a renewable energy transition. It's ensuring that we're using America's energy resources. On the climate side, it's making sure that we're complementing that with clean energy technologies and solutions that ensure that we help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And I want to make note that the United States has led the world in that effort over the last several years, reducing emissions more than the next 7 emissions-reducing countries combined. But we've got to make sure we look at this globally, and that as the United States has reduced emissions for every 1 ton we've reduced, China has increased by 4. It's a global issue, and so it's obviously not moving the world in the right direction. And the conservation piece that we're going to focus on today is resiliency. And I don't have to tell anyone in South Louisiana the importance of resiliency. We often think about resilience meaning resilience from hurricanes or from tropical storms. But resilience actually means a lot more than that. It's about the resilience not just of the communities or the property, but it's the resilience of the electrical system. Just under Hurricane Ida over a year ago, we saw electrical systems down for over 2 and 3 weeks in many of our communities across South Louisiana. So it's making sure we have a hardened grid that is capable of withstanding different conditions, whether you're in South Louisiana and have to deal with hurricanes, other parts of the country, snowstorms, or perhaps the Texas freeze in recent years, earthquakes, or other challenges that other parts of the country experience. To my right here, we have Congresswoman Debbie Lesko of Arizona, and oftentimes resilience to them may mean issues having to do with drought resilience and making it through different types of water conditions, which I did tell her she could take as much of our water back as she could bear. But in other parts of the country, perhaps out west, resilience means resilience from forest fires. It's about the resilience of our communities, which means property, which means economy, which means the environment, which means our ability to continue living and really just succeeding in these areas, thriving in these areas. I want to say it again, it's really an honor to be joined today by members of Congress from across the United States, as well as experts and stakeholders across South Louisiana. They're going to be able to share perspective today on what resilience looks like to them, their role in resilience, and how we can learn from some of the mistakes and successes that we've had over the last several years in this part of the country. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Congressman Adrian Smith to do a quick introduction.
Well, thank you. I'm Adrian Smith from Nebraska. So I have a very agriculturally centered district. But speaking of forest fires, we've had a fire right close to my home community. Fortunately contained now, but when you talk about resilience, I hear what you're saying, and I think energy is important across the board, certainly in agriculture these days, and the cost of inputs and supply chains in general. So glad to be a part of this. I look forward to hearing from you.
Debbie Lesko from Arizona. So I represent Phoenix and part of the northern and western suburbs of Phoenix. The new Taiwan semiconductor plant is being located in my district. I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I'm also on Garrett's task force and also on the House Energy Action Team and the Conservative Climate Caucus. So I'm here to learn and look forward to hearing from you.
I'm Billy Long from Missouri, Southwest Missouri, Springfield, Joplin, Branson, and home of the granddaddy of them all, not the rodeo, but Bass Pro Shops, and home to O'Reilly Automotive. And 5 months into my tenure in Congress, on May 22nd, 2011, 161 of my constituents were killed in Joplin, Missouri in an EF5 tornado. And we were voting that week. That was on a Sunday, and my wife looked at me and she said, "You're not going to DC tomorrow?" And I said, "No." And we were down there at the light of day, and you talk about total devastation. It looked like a disaster movie set everywhere. So if you want to get into resilience and what it does to it, a town of only 50,000 people, 161 people were killed. So everyone knew someone that had died. And I'm famous for sitting on the aisle during the State of the Union, whether it's Republican or Democrat president. And when President Obama would come down, I'd stop him and shake his hand. I wouldn't let go of it till I got done telling him what I wanted to tell him. And people at home, they said, "Oh, you shook a Democrat's hand. You'll lose your next re-elect." And they said, "What'd you tell him? What'd you tell him?" I said, "Well, I I told him, don't forget the people in Joplin, because he had come and walked the streets. And the next year, I stopped him, shook his hand, and they said, what did you tell Obama? I said, I was talking about the flooding in Missouri. And he said, well, me and Senator Blunt were talking about that in the hallway, and Senator Blunt comes down, you know, a few people after him, and I said, well, the president said, you all were talking about the flooding in Missouri, is that right? He said, yeah, we were talking about it in the hallway. So you know, I'm a people person. I was an auctioneer, real estate broker, 31 years before I went to Congress, and I try and work with both sides of the aisle to be resilient for our constituents and to help during floods. Tornadoes, of course, is huge in our neck of the woods, and drought we've been going through here recently until today. It was, you know, raining cats and dogs when I left home. But anyway, thrilled to be here, thrilled to be on the task force with this guy, and rented Iraqi war vet today on the plane and gave him one of my challenge coins, and I thought he was going to cry. And when we got off, he said, you know Garrett Graves? I said, yeah, are you going to the meeting we're going to? He said, no, I'm meeting with him next Friday. So if there's something I need to come to next Friday, you let me know.
Got it, thank you.
And now I get to follow that. I'm Austin Scott from Georgia's 8th District, and the 8th District actually touches the Florida line and runs pretty much up I-75 just north of Macon. And so my district is ag and military. I'm on the Armed Services Committee and the Ag Committee, so I'm interested in the discussion and how it relates to our food supply with agriculture and our national security with regard to the military. And I do want to go back to what Garrett said. I mean, we can do a better job bringing industry back to America and having those jobs right here in America, and that be better for the environment than it is to do the business in China or India or other countries where they don't have environmental standards.
Yeah.
Thank you. And before we turn to stakeholders, I just want to kind of do a little bit of a scene setter here. You know, so again, you heard different members of Congress talk about their view or perspective or maybe even priorities in resilience. In South Louisiana, it's about hurricanes often. I mean, that we're dealing with water. As we were talking outside, we drain Montana, New York, and Canada, so we're taking all this water coming south. We're dealing with the hurricanes and coastal land loss from the southern part of the state, and we've got challenges on both sides of us. And what we've seen is all of these great project solutions, and Dr. Reed can cite these in her sleeve, but in many cases, we've been talking about the same projects now for 30, 40, even 50 years. And projects aren't being built, so we've got to make sure that this discussion includes, we can't just have the ideas of the solutions, it's actually the implementation strategy as well, it's the prioritization of funding. So really want to talk through what that looks like, as well as, and I know many of you have had to deal with the actual recovery component. So here we have this alphabet soup of agencies, of FEMA, of Small Business Administration, of HUD, of USDA, and all of these other federal agencies that come in the aftermath of a disaster, and oftentimes our constituents are re-victimized by the federal government. These people whose homes have flooded or maybe been destroyed, and Wenda was just telling me you had damage from Hurricane Ida at your house, and trying to deal with that. Meanwhile, you have federal agencies saying, yeah, we'll give you help, all you gotta do is fill out these 12 applications, you know, put your firstborn right here, and you got it. And it's the last thing we need to be doing to people in the aftermath of disasters. Last thing I want to say is this. This is a fiscal issue as well, because you can look at all the studies, and again, Wendell and I know many others can cite these in their sleeve. The lowest number I've ever seen calculated is, I think, $3.50, and that's $3.50 saved for every $1 you invest in proactive mitigation type investments. And of course, there's studies that have shown $11, $12, even $16 in savings for every $1 invested. And so it's important to identify the best investments to get those projects actually built so that our communities can enjoy the savings, but most importantly, to where they can enjoy the resilience. So with that, Dr. Reed, if you don't mind, I'd love to put you on the spot and let you do a quick introduction, and we'll come around the table.
You would like me to introduce myself and say a little bit about what kind of work I do, is that right?
That would be great.
Great. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. For those of you who've come in from out of town, my name's Denise Reed, and obviously I'm from out of town too. But it's been 35 years or something that I've lived in coastal Louisiana, and I've worked on coastal restoration and land loss for all of those decades it is now. And so I have come from this from two perspectives. One is from the kind of professional side of things, where for the last 3 decades, I've been really working directly with state and federal agencies in trying to get some action, trying to get some things moving, putting things together, making sure we've got a solid scientific background. You know, so this is why we want to do this. This is what the data say in a really kind of undisputable way. And many of my colleagues around the table have also been contributing to that. And one of our, I think, I hope Mr. Graves would agree, one of our kind of flagships in Louisiana is our coastal master plan. And we developed a process for doing this after Katrina, when government was reorganized to focus on the issue. You talked about the alphabet soup. We've done it certainly at the state level, a reorganization to make sure that we have direct coordination of the folks in the state who need to be working on coastal issues on that. And really asking them to come up not just with ideas, but concrete plans on what we're going to do. And I think that has served us really well, because when funds have been available, and a couple of, you know, it could be oil spill funds that came through, or it could be, I don't know, bipartisan budget acts, or whatever those kinds of things are. We know what we're going to spend those monies on, and everybody knows what we're going to spend those monies on. And I think that has really served us well to have a plan for resilience, if you like, around several of the key issues, hurricanes and coastal land loss. The other perspective that I come from is that, you know, even though it says University of New Orleans on the tag, I live down the bayou, as it were. And I don't know, Wendell and I will probably argue about who lives further down the bayou, but he's going to say he does. He's just got the accent that shows he lives down the bayou longer than I have, right? And so I think just kind of understanding what it's like living in one of these communities that is subject not only to hurricanes and the challenges of recovery that Mr. Graves just described, but also this chronic threat that we have with water levels rising and the land degrading, and the decay that kind of brings to communities. And services are disappearing and moving away from communities. This is a vicious cycle. Like, once you don't have a school, once you don't have a church, once you don't have a library, and that has moved 20 miles up the bayou, then you start to move 20 miles up the bayou too. And so, and so you get these kind of remnant communities left there. And one of the reasons it's important is because whenever that happens, and those kind of consolidation of services, I can see that there's a fiscal reality to that and an efficiency to that. But we definitely lose something valuable about coastal Louisiana when those communities are gone. And they are, some of them are gone already, and others are really hanging on by their fingernails. And so, you know, the idea of how we can be proactive, as has already been discussed, in kind of preventing those kinds of things from happening, incentivizing in some way, to make sure that we are still providing the services that come from government in terms of, I don't know, trash pickup and roads and power after hurricanes, but also in terms of what private businesses are doing. You know, banks are moving away. We don't have them anymore. Pharmacies, doctors' offices, they're not there anymore. And so there's lots of different aspects to this resilience in coastal Louisiana. We kind of think of our primary problem as like the water, right? And our coastal master plan tries to deal with the water issue. But even once you've dealt with the water issue, you have to deal with these other issues too. Otherwise, you know, we might have an area that doesn't flood, but it doesn't mean that we have communities, that we have hung on to our heritage, and that we have resilience. And so, I'd like you to kind of see this as really, it sounds like those of you who are from rural areas or represent rural areas, you probably have exactly the same kind of issues in your communities as we have down the bayou. So I really kind of encourage you to think about it as a multifaceted problem here.
Thanks, Denise. And we are going to be flying them tomorrow. We're going to be taking around and letting them see, kind of the aerial perspective of it.
Cool. So you know where it is.
All right, next we have a former neighbor,
Yes.
and the guy that probably has one of the coolest tools in the state of Louisiana, or toys.
Toys, no, let's go tools.
Dr. Clint Wilson with
Yeah.
LSU runs, among other things, the fiscal model
Yeah.
for LSU.
All right, well, thank you. First off, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm Clint Wilson, professor in civil and environmental engineering at LSU, director of the LSU Center for River Studies, which wouldn't be what it was today if not for our congressman back when he was at CP. Is thinking about the education piece, right? So I've been teaching, 3 to 4 classes every year in term to our engineering students, and they don't just get that kind of classroom book education. We have opportunities to take them. I think a couple weeks ago, Robert Twilley had a group of students down with Wendell and South, in Lafourche, talking about the issues they're facing. So it's not just, hey, let's come up with some designs that work, in a really cool building or on the campus at LSU. It's like, hey, what do they need? What kind of solutions? What are some ideas that we can bring back and try to work on? I think the other part is thinking about how do we get our students to be, translate, or let's say more sooner, work towards not just what the cookie cutter or what the textbook answer is. They come out as engineers, they come out with their degree, and they're like, okay, I'm used to getting an answer. And you're like, think about, I asked them to drive around Baton Rouge and look at the drainage problems. I'm like, do you think the engineers 20, 30, 40 years ago thought they had the answers? Well, yeah, of course, yeah. Well, I said, do you think you're gonna have it? And they're like, no, I guess not, right? And so you think about really how do you design that resiliency into the system so that, when their kids are in school, I may not be teaching at that point, right? And when their kids are in school and taking classes in engineering, they're not saying, well, look how poorly maintained, look how under designed, look how our systems aren't working. And so, very fortunate to, be in a state and being at a university where I'm able to both, do really impactful research that helps with the state's coastal master plan, helps Department of Defense, but also then to educate our, future engineers. So, go from there.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
Next we have Scott Kirkpatrick, who started an organization called Coast Builders, which is all of the folks that are actually implementing the solutions. It's the contractors, the engineers, the dredgers, all the folks that are actually implementing the coastal master plan and making sure that we have a stakeholder group there to have a voice and participate and help us with value engineering solutions. So Scott, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. That was spot on. But I think today really want to certainly bring that perspective, and I think as we're really working through a tremendous resilience issue along our coast, right? I mean, I can remember Garrett when he was at the Coastal Protection Restoration Authority talking to me about, in certain instances, about, hey, how is the private sector going to respond to this? We're going to need this capacity somewhere down the road. Will the private sector be there? And we started talking about, okay, they're going to be looking at the funding. They're going to be looking at the master plan. And so I think hopefully today we can talk a bit about how some of what we've seen and learned at the industry level here in Louisiana can translate really across the nation about how as policymakers you can set the policy and provide the funds to where the private sector will really respond the way you need them to. So.
Great, Scott, thank you very much. Pierre Connor spent a number of years in the private sector, but runs Tulane's Institute for Energy Studies, and Louisiana, as many of you may know, we have by far the largest offshore energy industry in the United States and really in the world. If you take the 6 states that produce offshore energy in federal waters, Alaska, California, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, you can take all 5 other states, add up all of their federal production, and multiply it times about 4, and we still have more. And so huge industry and huge contribution to domestic energy. Tulane.
Thank you very much. As mentioned, I was actually in the upstream energy production business for 20 years and then spent 20 years in the investment banking capital raising business around energy. And now teach and run the Tulane Energy Institute at the Freeman School of Business. My focus is, frankly, sustainability from an economic standpoint. We've got to create resiliency that is economically sustainable. And I'm always very conscious of where the capital flows are. So I think that Scott mentions that. We've got to think about where the capital flows are and how do we attract them to create this sustainability. I think a good example there is capital coming for the energy transition, and how are we going to react to that? One of the things we do, as Dr. Wilson mentioned, that we do is real project-based learning for our business students. We've done projects around decarbonizing marine transportation in the LMR, Lower Mississippi River. We've We've done a project for a third-generation oil field service company that works down the bayou. And how will they handle the capital change around energy transition? And how can they get involved in, say, wind farm installation offshore? So what is the business model? What is their entry? So we work on projects like that I think are pretty important for the sustainability. But I do think that a focus on sustainability for the coast of Louisiana, you're gonna hear a lot about it, obviously, and you have, is so important because of the fact that Louisiana is an energy producer and an energy distributor, and we are gonna build, and we are building a massive LNG export system here. We need to work on getting pipelines built to get Haynesville down to export to the LNG terminals. Williams has got some projects in place, but we need to get these done. And I think part of the focus on moving forward is around facilitating permitting and facilitating the land access for transmission lines and for pipelines. All roads lead to Rome, all pipelines lead to Louisiana. Just look at a map and you'll see it. And we're now exporting crude oil that's coming out of the Permian, and we don't have the refining capacity. We're a crude oil exporter. We're an LNG exporter. Back in 1879, when Colonel Leeds built the jetties and we created the commerce for the Mississippi River, we then started the sediment that was really building up the protection for the rest of our communities. We need to move forward on creating that sediment back in there and building that resiliency to protect the energy infrastructure that Louisiana brings. And that, frankly, we're an your agriculture is coming to here and it's getting transported, so we need to be able to maintain that throughout thick and thin, so to speak. I think there's a lot of ways to do it, and there are good solutions. It was mentioned that Louisiana is an offshore oil industry state. And just a story, literally, my grandfather came to South Louisiana, shot the seismic for the first well drilled out of sight of land in 1947. And he was a real outdoorsman. He saw that a lot of his marsh buggies were tearing up the marsh. So there's got to be a better solution that's more economic and isn't going to tear up the marsh. He found some investors and they created a helicopter company to fly equipment and people over the marsh. And it didn't tear up the marsh. And now the offshore industry produces around the world 25% of the world's oil production, and it started right here in Louisiana. So we have that ability to, obviously touting the strengths of our people, infrastructure, and the knowledge that's here. But it's really important we maintain that. The other thing we get involved in, and I'll turn it over, is of course the resiliency of our power grid. And that's really important relative to the impact of when people are evacuated, the negative health consequences, and the ability to maintain this energy distribution system that we have. This is great. And then how do we pay for that? Great example, we lost power lines coming from 9 Mile Point into the city. During Ida, that was one of the major issues. We put it right back and strung it up. We could have buried those lines for $2 million. That's resiliency, and we need to create that in our power grid systems and throughout the Southeast. So.
Thank you. And I want to, just a couple things. You've heard a number of people mention down the bayou. I want to translate. Down the bayou basically means south of here. Kind of south of here, largely southwest of here. So we're going to be down the bayou. We'll be there, flying down there. We'll be down there Friday and Saturday, so we'll explain that a little bit more. You've heard Fushaw mentioned a few times. Fushaw is the port that services about 90% of the offshore oil and gas industry or energy industry from Alabama to Texas. And then coastal land loss, one thing that we're going to cover a good bit tomorrow, but I did just want to make sure y'all were aware. 90% of the coastal wetlands loss in the continental United States occurs in our home state. 90%. So we've lost about 2,000 square miles of coastal Louisiana. It's like taking the state of Rhode Island off the map. We've lost that, and so we like to say that Arkansas doesn't evacuate when hurricanes come because we're their buffer. We've lost ours. And so it's why Hurricane Katrina, Rita, Gustav Ike, Isaac, and more recently Ida, Laura, Delta, Zeta just caused some of the devastation that they did. So when they talk about the Coastal Master Plan, it's an integrated, scientifically based plan that is, I think, the most advanced one in the world that integrates all the solutions, portfolio of structural and non-structural solutions. So natural infrastructure as well as gray or concrete infrastructure and hardened infrastructure. And one of the things we did as part of all of this structure we put together, the organizational structure we put together, is we created a not-for-profit called the Water Institute of the Gulf. And the Water Institute of the Gulf was designed to be that caller of balls and strikes. So this is the scientific organization that's not influenced by politics. It's balls and strikes. This succeeded, this failed, let's make sure we understand why, helping us devise solutions moving forward. A lot of the people at the table, including Denise and Clint, were very involved in helping us put this thing together and get it up on its feet. And Hugh Roberts is here today to represent the Water Institute of the Gulf. So.
Thank you all for inviting me to be here today, and thank you to your team. They accommodated me to be the last one here, and also the first one to leave, so I'll apologize. I have a flight that I have to run to, but your team's been amazing coordinating, so thank you. To add on a few notes, to build off what Denise had said, coming from the nonprofit that helped call the balls and the strikes, my background is also from the private sector, so before joining the Water Institute, I'd worked with different groups across the country, starting with post-Katrina, helping to design levees here, many of the master plans we've talked about, working in New York post-Sandy, helping Boston with their climate studies, San Francisco and under Vermont. I come from Montana, I've worked on the Platte, I've worked in Florida and Georgia in their water line, their water rights and the balance there. So have a good spread. One of the things certainly I've observed nationally is that science leading decision making is one of the keys. And so I certainly kudos to Congressman Graves and the entire group here in Louisiana that really have stood up some of these processes like the Coastal Master Plan that as Denise hit on, really these are the signposts, right, in terms of the science driving decisions and helping prepare us. It's an important step. Certainly one thing I would bring to the table too from the seat I sit in at the Water Institute is the importance of science to inform decision making and really coupling that with policy, right? And so that science can inform policy as well in terms of making good changes to policy. We do many things right now, including some of the funding that we do because we've laid out rules of the road, and that is how people plan. They plan around, well, these are the rules by which we get funding, so that is how we move towards resilience. That might not be exactly what the need is, but they're working through the directions that they can with funding to make incremental progress in the way they're moving. And the last thing I would certainly add is I think from my perspective, a key to resilience is building capacity and capability, and Clint hit on this in the education side. Certainly there's a need to build capacity at local levels, at the state government level, in our parishes and in our municipalities. There's also a need to build capacities with our engineers. So one of the things we talk about a lot with the policy side of what we do, well, if we change policy, for instance, if you change the benefit cost analysis, so a fundamental tool we use to disperse funding, if you change that, there is a need to build a capacity within every agency that touches that, the federal agencies, the state agencies, locals, how they build that, right? And if we can, for instance, if the Army Corps of Engineers is going to evaluate something that is resilient, which that is often very subjective, right? It's not very often black and white. We have to have the people in the positions that do the evaluation of that funding and of success, what is resilience, who have the ability, the tools, the science-informed tools, but the ability by which to subjectively understand and stack these things up, particularly when you have a national portfolio. Right? New York is very different than Florida, than down the bayou versus New Orleans. And so this subjectivity, as it plays into science and policy, to me is also an important bit to how we get from where we are today to a more resilient future. So, but thank you for the opportunity to be here, and again, kudos to you and the whole team that is really. One thing, one story I will add is I worked on the 2012 master plan with Denise.
Yes, that's right.
And Hurricane Sandy happened in 2012. So you may.
And Isaac.
Yeah, well, and the reason Sandy is important is because the mayor's office in New York calls and says, hey, we hear you're the guy, one of the people behind the flood risk modeling in Louisiana. And it had nothing to do with me or the work we had done. It had everything to do with what Louisiana was doing, right? Science-informed decision-making and investing in that technique and those methods, the balls and the strikes, to help make that guide. And so this, today, I still believe that what Louisiana is doing is very far advanced in many of its peer states. So.
Thank you for being here. So if y'all take your earpieces and put them in, the translation's going to come in in your ear. The next speaker we have as we talk down the bayou is Corey Keefe, who is born and raised down the bayou and worked in the offshore industry, whether it be oil and gas or as he has quickly become an expert now in some of the renewable offshore opportunities, but worked around the world, knows maritime industry better than just about anybody. So Corey Keith.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Congressman Greaves. And if y'all don't understand me, it's because my wife didn't give me my medication that slows me down today, and I drank a little too much coffee. So just slow me down if y'all don't understand me. I'm good friends with Ted. And I know that Dr. Reed knows Ted Fogel real well. My uncle was the president of the board for 17 years. As a matter of fact, the bridge is named after him, going to the board. Mr. Tommy Ducey. But anyway, my Uncle Tommy also owned a tugboat company, and I've been in this for 46 years now, okay? And we sold everything out 10 years ago, and I work for the competition now. You know, you're always a bad guy till you become the gun of the bad guy. Yeah, so, as our wives are really, that's a big deal. Right? But anyway, I was born and raised in Windows District in South Lafourche, and we're, as Congressman Greaves mentioned, we're in the tugboat industry, okay? I started working offshore when I was 15 years old. Didn't go to college. Probably the only person in this room without a college degree. Been all over the planet doing things, mostly this. And the main thing that I want to discuss relative to our business is that when I first started working offshore, we were doing installation of platforms and pipelines and moving drilling rigs and all of this, you know, and it was like, why go to college? You know, I'm making cash here. I remember Lulin Petrie asked me when I refused to get a membership to the National Honor Society. He said, "This is your ticket to college." I said, "I'm not going to college. I'm going to the North Sea." So anyway, all these things kind of happened, and the years go by, and I actually became the president and chairman of the board of a company that was, you know, turning 100, 120 million a year moving drilling rigs. But you know, at the peak of the thing in 2005, on the shelf, there must have been about 220 available rigs to drill on the shelf, 180
How
working.
about the Otter Cat down shelf?
On the shallow water part of the coast. In the deep water, there was about 65 deep water units that were drilled. And right around Hurricane Katrina time, Macondo time, all these things led to this decline, to where now there's 12 deep water rigs drilling in the Gulf. And there's 6 shallow water rigs drilling on the shelf. And we can sit here and talk production all day, sir, because everybody's, oh, production's at its height. No, I got news for y'all. We got a production problem coming because there's no drilling going on. There is no leases being sold. The last robust lease sale we had was in the Obama era, believe it or not. And then after Macondo, it stopped. And Trump did 0 for that. And going into Biden, nothing's being done. It's even worse. I'll study lease sales because that tells me what the future is. 5 years to drill a well in shallow water, 8 in deep water. And I got news for y'all folks, the production stuff is gonna hit a brick wall somewhere down the road. It's coming. So now I'm watching our companies remove the pipelines and the platforms that we installed years ago. And the shelf is becoming, the shallow water sector of the Gulf is becoming bare. So what that tells us, we made a lot of capital investments into buying this huge fleet of tugboats that don't have anything to do. You know, and we've been hearing from the administration about, oh, we're gonna convert y'all and help y'all get into the renewable market. Well, then where are y'all? You know, we need them to step up to the plate. And they got some little programs that help. If you could stand on one foot and twirl a hula hoop and blink your eyes fast and blow a police whistle at the same time, they'll help you. But that's not what we need. All right, so we're looking at all these things. So now we have a dredge company, and a company that delivers aggregate. We have a renewable business and a freight forwarding company. We had to diversify. So now we have 9 corporations of different things. Between me and the gate post for, you know, boy, you didn't get all that book learning and all. I guess it's been a little bit for us to take on, but if you know how to read, you can figure out most things. All right, so we've done all these things. In this process, you know, we've turned turned into something else. There's a young lady named Christy, I don't remember, got married, I don't remember your last name.
Sarang, thank you.
She's the director of the South Central Industrial Association, and actually, I was on the board when we hired you, I was president when we hired you. And at the same time, I was appointed to be on one of our local flood control districts, with the North Lafourche Levy District. Now I got nominated by all the flood control authorities in the state. I'm the president of the Association of Levy Boards for the state. So we're looking at all these things and trying to make everybody understand a couple of things. First of all, the renewables are coming to the Gulf. Thank God. Second of all, we're building the resiliency structures to protect the service companies that perform services for the energy industry. It's not oil and gas, it's not wind and solar, it's all energy. I don't care what kind of energy it is, we're building resiliency because we have to. That's the Bible Belt of the service industry is here. All the fabrication companies, the marine transportation companies, every little wire and cable and bolt and piece of iron you could think of is gonna happen here, all right? So my engagement into the flood protection system was like, if we don't do something about this, we're not gonna be able to stay here. And we knew all these things were coming. All right, so Wendell, I lived in Wendell's system for a long time. All my life, I've been knowing Wendell since I'm a child. And I moved out of my region into a region and became the levy district president there because I knew we had to. We had to, we don't have a choice. It's either that or take the last train to Tulsa, and I'm not doing that. I like going to catch fish. You can catch all the fish you want because they all migrated inland because we don't have enough fresh water. We used to be able to go duck hunting over here. The ducks are all up north, and the saltwater fish moved up north, and we got to reverse that. There's a lot of salt water out there for them fish. 75% of the earth is salt water. They can go back where they came from. And I like eating ducks. So, I like to catch fish and all too, that's all fun. But when you tie all these things together, our communities were raised there, our families were raised there. We're talking about family businesses. We all know each other. You know, you leave your keys on your car and you don't lock your house and it's
What's your
changing.
address?
It's not really, well, I don't, because I really don't care. And so the point is this, when you start talking about resiliency, it's not just about the resiliency of the industry and the resiliency that you're building relative to flood protection, it's the people. We don't want to leave. And if you look at how many people across this nation lives under flood protection, how many? And how many live a place where there's coastal affinity? What's that number? Well, I can't remember, I just know it's a big number. Well, the renewable energy sector is coming online. A few things we need to remember. Number one, oil and gas is always gonna be there. There's a safe way to do it. Look, Scott Angelo and I are good friends. He and I have had too many conversations about how much it's changed. Renewables is coming, and people, you can argue whether or not you think it's something that's practical or whatever. It's gonna start somewhere and end up somewhere, just like oil and gas did. I had a friend of mine from Arkansas who drilled some of the first wells over here, and I asked him, I said, what's your deal with those drilling wells? He's dead now. He said, oh, we just bring a rig out there, we pop a hole in the ground and start spewing oil. So we finally figured out to drive a pipe in the ground, drill inside the pipe and let it flow in the barge. That's what they did. They never knew now what they did. And he told me, he said, the first well we drilled, we drove 35 creosote pilings into the hole to stop it because we didn't know what to do with it. Now this is in the 40s or something, you know, 50s, whenever they started it. So look where they've come with that. And here in the wind sector, it's the same thing. And we're talking to these wind people a lot, and everybody's thinking, oh, the wind here is not good. The wind people want to sell windmills. And they're engineering windmills that will work in non-optimal conditions, so it's coming. And let's remember another thing. You can't export renewable energy. Can't. So that's a lot of stuff we need to think about. Resiliency for the industry needs to be addressed. Resiliency for the service industry, the people that live here that's gonna do all of this, needs to be addressed, and the resiliency of the people is what's more important to me than anything. So that's it for me. Sorry I sucked all the air out the room, but.
Thanks, Corey. Next person we have is Jasmine Brown, who's with the Greater New Orleans Inc., which is our regional chamber of commerce. And Jasmine, before you start, I want to, one thing I want to convey to people here, in the early 1900s to the mid 1900s, this area right here was the economic engine of the South. And let me see if I can offend everybody here. It was more economic activity than Atlanta, than St. Louis. I'm not sure about y'all, but it was huge. And just some of the natural strengths or assets that this region has is that were really capitalized on then. The good news is they're still here. And so Jasmine's here to represent Greater New Orleans Inc. That's just a great partner in this region, and again, largely serves as our Chamber of Commerce for this part of the country. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Jasmine Brown, Vice President of Public Policy for commonly called GNO Inc., as the Congressman stated. We are the Regional Economic Development Organization for the 10 parishes of the Greater New Orleans region. And so I want to just touch on truly a little bit of what everyone has already said. We do believe, and I love, Corey, that you said that resilience and resiliency efforts are truly about the people. And so we truly believe that as the economic development organization for the region, obviously our ultimate goal is to protect the economy for this region, but guess what? If we don't have the people here, if we can't protect our people, then we don't have an economy. And so we firmly believe that, our CEO, Michael Heck, firmly believes that. And so that really explains truly why we got involved in coastal restoration and protection back in 2014. We understand that coastal resiliency and economic development are truly mutually dependent. Many people are surprised when we talk about the fact that we are involved in coastal restoration and protection as an economic development organization. But while we are not scientists and don't proclaim to be, we do understand that in order for the great work of CPRA and folks like Dr. Reed and others in the room, that if we can have a very firm and established business and civic support and advocacy for the work of, that Hugh is doing as well, and for the great work of the state as it relates to advancing coastal resiliency for this state and for this coast, we know that we can only elevate what's already happening. And so that's the angle that we've decided to take. And from that, we've established what's called CCRE, our Coalition for Coastal Resilience and Economy, which is a nonpartisan, diverse coalition of business leaders from around the 10 parishes of the region who have decided to champion coastal restoration and protection. So we advocate for things like making sure that the Coastal Master Plan is funded. We believe in the Coastal Master Plan. We believe that it's one of the best plans, as it has been stated multiple times already today, so I won't beat that horn, but one of the best plans and scientifically rooted plans that the country has seen as it relates to coastal restoration and protection. And so making sure that those projects have the appropriate funding is a part of our work. And so that's why we're in DC advocating for things like the RISE Act and the BREEZE Act, so that we can have reformation around Low Mesa to be able to increase some of those funds for the Coastal Master Plan. And of course, we can move into the energy transition, and of course, has already, and also Dr. Connor has spoke so well already about the energy transition, but that is also something that we are very committed to. It's been said over and over again that renewables are here. And because we are one of the leading, if not, as was already stated again, we are leading the nation in being able to contribute to things like offshore wind around the country. And so making sure that our economy is prepared for that, our workforce is prepared for that. And so that's why we work alongside, however, Lamoga, our good friend Tommy Fauché, to make sure that the energy transition that's happening here along the coast is diversified. It's not an either or. But it is an and statement, and we firmly believe that. And so within our H2 for the future proposal, which is actually one of the finalists in a federal grant, the Build Back Better grant, out of maybe close to 600 applicants. And that H2, the future proposal, is really centered around that. It really couples pieces of the conversation today that most people have talked about, but that is really establishing a diversified approach to the energy transition, capitalizing on what we're already contributing to the offshore wind industry and others, but then also making sure that our oil and gas companies are properly represented and are provided proper aid as well. So that's us from an energy transition perspective, and there's a ton of legs to that. We had about a week. I would be able to go into each of those, but I'll spare you guys a little bit. I know we have some other colleagues that need to speak, but also I have to mention infrastructure resilience as well. It was already mentioned that hardening the power grid is a priority and has to continue to be a priority. When it comes down to hurricanes, from an economic development perspective, if our businesses can't get back online in a reasonable time, you'll see an exodus, and you'll continue to have that as an economic development challenge. And so from our perspective, that is something that we have been very supportive of historically. Most recently, we've supported Entergy's brick application along with the state. And we are also supporting some Stafford Act amendments to be able to utilize the CBDG funds for private utility companies so that we don't have that transition of the cost to the consumers. We don't want to see that cost shifted there as well. And in the last 10 seconds, I have to mention flood insurance. We have not talked about that yet, but we do believe that flood insurance is definitely a critical part when we're talking about resilience. It's not just from the coastal master plan projects perspective, but if we don't reform our NFIP program and make sure that there's transparency, that there's affordability, and that we're mitigating some of those issues, then we are definitely going to see, as most recently reported, we're going to see a mass exodus. And so if we don't have folks participating in the program, then as it was stated earlier by the congressman, when you're investing $3.50, I believe you said, or you invest $1, into resilience, including flood insurance, and having that properly executed, then we're saving $3.50, for every dollar. So that's something that's really important. We have our Coalition for Sustainable Flood Insurance has been around for years. We're back activated. We've been working with our congressional delegation across our district. Your support staff has been wonderful, Congressman Griggs. So thank you for that. And we're continuing to rev up our coalition, which is national. So thank you so much for allowing us to be at the table. And there's so much great things happening here, but yet so much work to be done. So thank you.
Great. Jasmine, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Next one we have is Tommy Fauché, who has spent much of his life working for industry in these difficult conditions and trying to deal with resiliency. I know that in your last job you left some big shoes to fill that folks are having trouble filling. I want to thank you very much for being here, but he represents Louisiana Mid-Continent Oil and Gas Association, or LAMOGA, which is the energy producers primarily doing much of the work in the offshore area. So Tommy, thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, Congressman, and thanks to all of you for spending some time in Louisiana as well. So we do. My association represents the oil and natural gas industry in Louisiana, which includes the Gulf of Mexico. When you think of Louisiana energy issues, you have to frame them as America's energy issues because, as has been said many times now around the table, if our energy industry, if oil and gas is not successful in Louisiana and the Gulf of Mexico, the nation suffers. And as we've seen actually lately, the world needs our energy. As you would imagine, so I represent obviously those major companies. Think of the Shells, Chevrons, Exxons, BPs of the world who are producing oil and natural gas, as well as some of the operators who are in North Louisiana producing natural gas. But we also represent the refineries, many of which are located along this river. As you go further inland, we also represent a lot of the large LNG companies. Pierre mentioned the terminals that are being developed that are not, as we speak, providing natural gas, exporting it to Europe post or during this crisis with Russia and Ukraine. Our industry is at an interesting time. From a policy standpoint, there are a lot of headwinds. Corey was talking about the situation with oil and gas leases in the Gulf of Mexico. this conversation is happening right now. Whether you look at provisions in the reconciliation package on the Senate side, whether you look at what is happening, there is finally, after really just unfortunate delay after delay, there is finally at least a proposed plan for offshore leases that has been drafted and proposed by Interior. We're in that comment period. We still don't know that it will actually get across the table. All of that being said, if the Gulf of Mexico's capability to produce oil and gas is taken away, then there are issues for Louisiana, for the country. And we have to, and we have been spending a lot of time advocating to make sure that that does not take place. I want to frame the resiliency conversation just quickly around our industry, in that if you think about the fact that Louisianans who work for all the companies that I just mentioned are producing the oil and gas that supplies the energy needs of the nation. We know that oil and gas the need for oil and gas, despite investment in renewables, continues to go up at least through 2050. We know that. So we need to protect the industry here. When you talk about resiliency, many of our workers, the men and women who are supporting and doing the work every day, whether they're on the offshore platform or working in one of their refineries, they're also living in the parts of the country, the parts of this state that need protection. We've talked about IDA. I think probably everybody on this side of the table is impacted personally by IDA, my home included. Many of the industries, many of the facilities that were rushing to restore energy supply post-Hurricane Ida, men and women were working day and night to restore their company's ability to supply energy, while at the same time trying to figure out where their families were going to sleep at night. Those conversations don't happen in isolation. I was assuming Jasmine would get to flood insurance. Look, the fact that the National Flood Insurance Program is making it, is causing families who support the oil and gas needs of this country, is causing these men and women to stay up at night, wondering whether or not they'll be able to afford their homes, to live in their homes in a region where they don't have to commute 2 hours to work, is important, because the industry has to survive. I would just pivot real quick. I've spent most of the summer, as you would imagine, talking about gasoline prices. A lot of this has come as we have had calls by the federal government, by the administration over the past several years, to see fossil fuels eliminated. We are working to spend time with elected leaders, members of communities around the state, to show them that it is not for us an either or. Many of our companies, the largest oil and gas producers in the world, are also going to be the most significant investors in renewables. They're going to be the ones who are going to invest and develop technologies to reduce carbon emissions. They're doing it all at the same time. And we have to look at this as an all of the above, all at the same time approach. It's the only way that we can sustain the industry. It's the only way we can sustain many American communities, by providing the energy that they're going to need and the energy that they're going to want. We have, it is somewhat perplexing, and I'll make this my final point for the moment. It is somewhat perplexing that as the industry has tried to do things to reduce carbon emissions, that when the economics of gasoline prices became problematic, then there was a call by the same people who wanted the industry to go away to then try to find ways to maximize energy production and energy refining. We can't allow that conversation to keep happening that way. We have to have energy policies that promote all of the above, that are predictable, that starts with offshore leases, that starts with the EPA providing certainty. Louisiana has its Class 6 primacy application in. Our members, our companies need that to move forward in an expeditious way, so that they can then start investing in technologies like carbon capture to start reducing carbon emissions. The companies want to do that. The industry wants to do it. The federal government wants the industry to do it. They have to do their part. They have to be consistent. They have to be predictable. They can't be all over the map.
Tommy, thank you. The next speaker is someone you're gonna recognize the voice from the earpiece earlier. This is Wendell Kirall, who is Executive Director of the South Lafourche Levy District, and I'm just gonna call him a professor of coastal sustainability. Lives and runs the levee system down the bayou. And been doing this most of his life, and just a great resource for on-the-ground conditions and common sense. So
I got to
thanks.
follow up on what was said, though, because all the industries all around us. Our community is a boat community. There were oystermen, fishermen, shrimpers. Then these guys from Texas and Oklahoma came down to drill holes. They were okay on the land, when they came to get on the water, they didn't know how to handle it. Our guys switched our boats from doing shrimp and oysters to bringing those Texans and Oklahomans to drill the hole. We've continued to do that, not only just on the marsh, then offshore, in deep offshore, the North Sea, the Persian Gulf. We end up in New York Harbor doing some boating, and California. The tugboat people from South Lafourche were like the modern day Vikings without the raping and pillaging. Okay, and it's true. They've been all over the place. I've been impressed. My goal, I've been working in government all my life, but my goal was to never work like government, work like the guys, my uncle, at the company, the Carson Tugs were named after. And the other thing I want to mention, excuse me, is why is green energy called green? It's not ripe. If we just, look, everybody here agrees, don't do everything. That's what America always does, it does everything.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's called a Wendellism. They're famous.
But it's true. It's, don't force it. It's out there. It's gonna be there. Eventually we'll get there. But don't make us be all poor by not drilling and doing the other things. The other thing Einstein said, you got a complex problem and you got a simple solution, it's probably not right. Okay? All I hear is CO2. I've been reading about global warming since 1982. Jim Titus published a book for EPA and been studying it. And I've talked to a lot of people, National Academy of Science people, father of floodplain management, and people who have developed the models that a lot of people depend on. And it's just not there. From there, that's what they tell me. I'm not to that level. They say it's not there, but there's good scientists on both sides, but there's a bunch of lies on both sides also. For someone to say that CO2 is a poison, without plants having CO2, we don't exist. So we gotta just get to the facts and the real facts about what's going on. And we can do what we need to do. Flood protection, and resilience. You know, I gotta start with the flood insurance. You know, there are studies that say communities that experience an emergency or a disaster, if they are well insured, bounce back and do okay. When it's not there, and right now, risk rating 202 wants to unresilient our communities when it comes to floods. We had our levee system, we have not flooded since 1985. In the 90s, we finally were able to close the circle. It's a ring levee system. We haven't flooded since then. We're 30 miles south of New Orleans. For Katrina and Rita, everybody to the east of us flooded for Katrina. Everybody west of us flooded for Rita. We didn't flood. In fact, I brought the voice of our money needs to Washington because everybody else was busy fighting the storms. But we've continued to work and improve the levee system. I do want to say the emergency management for this storm. I had 1 million cubic yards of material, debris on the levee. And I had to go repair the levee and get that debris off to get the cracks growing again to be ready for August 15th. It was a tremendous task, but FEMA sat with me and I was really impressed because a lot of times FEMA doesn't move very much at all. But we made some decisions that saved a bunch of money and saved a bunch of time. And now the levee that I have is pretty much ready for the upcoming season. But the issue with our issues in coastal Louisiana, they've been here for a long time because of the way it was put together. Every bit of soil under here was brought here by flood, okay? From western New York to Montana, all the way into Canada. A drop of water that came into the river eventually dropped some of that sediment here. So over the last 5,000 years, if you could do a time-lapse photography of South Louisiana showing the river, but do it in 1 minute, you see the river going back and forth, changing its channels and providing all this material. So you have this wet soil that gravity keeps pulling on. We got good at flood protection on the river in the 1930s. From that time on, we really started to lose leveling. That's the whole issue. It had nothing to do with sea level rise, global warming. Subsidence is a controlling factor. What the future brings, maybe sea level rise will overtake subsidence, but we have some places that we've documented just recently that we've lost a foot of elevation in 20 years. We have a place called Leeville, but it's basically nobody living there anymore, but that's where 3 out of my 4 grandparents live. And in in its heyday, 1900 to 1915, that land was 4 feet higher than it is today. When y'all fly down to Fouchon, show them where Leeville is. And Leeville, the area that we've incorporated inside the levee system, Leeville is just an exaggerated shoulder of the road. But back in 1900, you could ride a horse a quarter of a mile perpendicular to the bayou and go on land. But now, if we didn't have the levee system, when you fly over, Leeville is nothing more than an exaggerated shoulder of the road. That's all that's left. Our system inside of Golden Meadow, Galliana, Cutoff, parts of the roads would look like Leeville if we didn't have a levee system. But that's doable if you have the will. You know, we talk about the Netherlands. The Netherlands doesn't have better engineers. They have nothing better than what we have here in the United States, except one thing, the will. Simply the will. When you come down at Schiphol Airport, and you fly in there, that pilot's coming down and he looks on his altimeter and it's 0, and he goes another 17 feet below 0, because the airport's called Schiphol Airport. Schiphol. That's where they used to put the derelict vessels. All right? So it can be done. The richest country in Europe is the Netherlands. But the Netherlands is about the size of South Louisiana. If South Louisiana was a country, they tried it didn't work back in the 1860s. It was a country. We would have the $6 billion a year average coming off of the coast that we supported, and we'd be charging these guys in the Midwest for their grain to pass through our river. That's why the Netherlands is extremely successful. But they have the will. They flooded in 1953. They had the same problems we have in South Louisiana. 53, 80% of the country flooded. They said from then on, never again. They put the same percentage that we put in military defense on their gross national product. They put on flood protection from about 1953 to about 2000. And they have been successful. So it's all doable, but it's will. When you have will with the means, you have force to accomplish. And we have, some of us have the will, we need to get some of the means back. Just generally what's going on, but Ida was the 5th most intense hurricane to hit the United States. It passed on the critical path for Grand Isle, Fouchon, and our system in South Lafourche. So it had the most wind and water, and not one FEMA claim that I'm aware of. And if there is, it's very rare.
Not for flooding.
What's that?
Not for flooding.
Well, no FEMA claims. I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Flood insurance claims. I'm sorry, let me just get it straightened out. No flood insurance claims. We had roof damage, was crazy, but we were able to keep the water out on that hurricane. And so we were very fortunate. One problem is people started believing into our system too much. Anybody I talked to told them, you had a category 4 hurricane. And I cannot guarantee that the water's not gonna be higher than the levee. The levee is full lead. Go to naturally high ground, let the levee protect the property. Well, talking to the fire department, they were getting calls in the middle of the storm. They estimated 40% of the people stayed. Had the storm surge gotten in, we would have had 7 to 8 feet of water in people's houses. We'd have lost hundreds of people, if not 1,000. And if any message, that's a message I get to them. We know we got a good system, but it doesn't matter how good your system is. If God puts 5 feet water higher than the height of your system, you're gonna have a disaster. And but basically, well, resilience is about being there, looking, facing the fact. I think New Orleans is not fear flooding enough, believe it or not. After going through Katrina, I don't see the intensity, the desire to be afraid of that, of hurricanes and up. One of the problems why New Orleans flooded, rainfall flooding is always a big problem here in New Orleans. And it happens so often that people put priority against rainfall flooding over hurricane flooding. That was really, they had to make some decisions, and they did. But the way I tell people that, look, you measure rainfall in inches and storm surge in feet, and that is the difference. And the worst flooding New Orleans might ever have, if that river would ever go, if it would break, the river levee, you would not be able to work or do anything until the river would go down. So you talk about not doing anything for months at a time. So it's important to understand what your risks are. If you deal with your risk, resilience comes.
Thanks, Wendy.
Wendell for president.
And Dr. Christine Strickland is the head of Fletcher Technical Community College, which is also down southwest of here. And I got to give a shout out to Dr. Strickland and her school. They have been, from my perspective, the most agile education system that I've ever seen in my life, and that they have been able to so quickly adapt to the needs of workforce. It is just, it's remarkable. Everything from bringing in the equipment from the field to where the students graduate and the next day they're seeing the same equipment in their jobs, and in many cases the same instructors as their bosses. Just unbelievable job. And as we talk about, as Scott did, building capacity in this new sector, building capacity for resilience. Dr. Strickland has been great in helping to lead the way for the workforce training. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your kind words. We try really hard to be adaptable and nimble, and I know many of you have community colleges, obviously, in your areas. Maricopa, the Georgia Technical Community College System, we look to them for a lot. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about community college because I know you know what that is, but I think there are a couple of pieces that are really important to this conversation about resiliency. Some I think we've learned the hard way by living through some of these storms and the events of the past few years. To start with, though, I think probably the thing that we're most known for, and probably the thing that's most important to our nation at this point, is workforce. Everywhere you go, there are shortages, whether it's in a restaurant or on a rig. Everyone is looking for employees, and really that's where we come to play. We like to say that for every one professional who is out there, whether it's a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer, you have anywhere from 8 to 12 of our associate degree students who are supporting that work. And so it takes a lot of those individuals to really make our economy run. And I think that that's really a vital and critical thing that we need to focus on as we look toward how we become more resilient in terms of our economy and in terms of that workforce. For me, over 95% of my students stay in our region. They stay in our local community to work. And so their ability to live there, to be educated there, and then to find jobs there is critical. We have a conversation all the time about chicken and the egg. I have industry who comes to me and says, we'd like to relocate. Do you have the workforce? And we look around and we go, oh, we're not sure, right? And then just vice versa, finding the industry for the educated and trained workforce we have. And the other part is just being nimble and agile. Things are changing very rapidly for us. So our ability to pivot and change what we do and how we teach. Great example, I think, came out of Ida. We had Ida, we all evacuated, we came back, and what we heard from a number of our students was, we don't want to miss this whole semester, but we need a couple of weeks. And so we started a second 8-week mini-mester so that we could get students back enrolled. And what that's led to is this year we're launching year-round 8-week sessions, short sessions, because we recognize that things are going to happen, like hurricanes, like storms. And so instead of people losing entire months or years of their ability to participate in the workforce, we need to be able to set up a strategy in which they can get back involved. I think the other critical part of this is that I think a lot look to the 18-year-old, and that's great, and they are our future, but we know that there are a lot of adults, especially in Louisiana, who are not participating in our workforce like they could. And so how do we tap into those adults? How do we help them get back in? I'm gonna go on my soapbox for a minute and just say that we have an educational model that's very agrarian and is not responsive to the working adult. For me, if I'm a single mom and I'm trying to raise kids and maybe I'm elderly care, doing elderly care for parents, and I'm trying to hold a full-time job, when do I go to school? Because we don't have a populace anymore that's 18 that can go and be residential and do that. There's a section that can, And that's great, but how do we tap into this broader workforce availability that we have in our adults? And how do we change education models so that we can engage them, help them get the skills they need? I often refer to it as a highway, right? I need to on-ramp, get some skills, off-ramp, go work a little bit. But and I inevitably might work my way up to my doctoral degree. But those pathways have to be more available. I would be remiss if I didn't say with all you all sitting here, that one of the opportunities that I think exists is to re-envision some of our federal policies around this very issue. It's doable, and I understand that there are frameworks in place to help protect students and families, but in some ways, those things do dampen innovation. And so how do we create a system where there's accountability? I think everybody believes in that because we want to be relevant to the people we serve. But how do you do that in a framework that allows for the nimbleness and the agility and the flexibility to be responsive to the needs of the community? The other point that I'll just make, and it comes both from a professional and personal side. So I lived in New Orleans for Katrina and had some devastating losses there, and now have lived through Ida. Fortunately, my house came through a lot better in this go-around. But for Katrina, about 4 days after the storm, I was asked to return back to campus, and I lived on campus for a month coordinating emergency personnel and folks who were actually living on our campus. And coming back post-Ida, I really believe that we have some untapped resources in our community college system around this nation to have an impact on recovery. And, you know, short-term recovery, everybody rolls in, right? We have lots of food, we have lots of support. But when we hit that middle road recovery and the long-term recovery after folks have to go home and get back to their normal lives, the community is the one who's left looking around and saying, how do we continue to move forward? I say that because community colleges, most of your community colleges sit in, they probably have at least one campus that sits in an at-risk district with underserved populations, with populations who are maybe in the lower socioeconomic status. And our ability to be available to the community post-storm is really important. I know for us, Fletcher, we're a community asset. People know us, they are comfortable coming to campus, they're familiar with us. So how can we tap into that in terms of both our facilities, our people, our ability to train and educate folks? How can we leverage, for instance, ourselves as a state community college, as a state resource, to be a part of that recovery conversation? I'm really proud that Fletcher has actually been selected to pilot this, and what we're looking to do is to develop a resiliency plan that then, you know, LSU could take, or UL Monroe could take and apply to whatever their recovery or sustainability or resiliency needed to look like, whether it was a hurricane or a tornado or a forest fire. How can they take that and replicate it? I think that that's really, really important. And I'll end with sort of just a little side note. One of the things that we heard a lot post-Ida was that a lot of what we do now is internet-based. But when you're without power for 21 days or more, there's no filling out FEMA applications. But if we can figure out how we harden up some of our community resources, and I'm specifically here talking about, for instance, your community college, your local community college, how you can harden up one of those buildings so that there's internet access, there's people there, like my resources, sometimes my faculty aren't gonna be teaching at that point. I'd love to deploy them to help members of our community access resources that they need, fill out their FEMA applications. And those are the types of things that I think we bring to the table that we haven't really thought about yet. And so to really begin to look at what are our community resources and how can they intersect and interplay in long-term recovery, midterm recovery, and just overall viability and continued viability of our communities across the nation. So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you, and make note, even if you had electricity, in many cases, you still didn't have internet because internet was down. Even FirstNet, which is supposed to be the the resilient cellular communication system was down, and our first responders, 911 systems were down for, in some cases, weeks, so it was a mess, but thank you very much. Christy Sarang is, coastal Louisiana is different for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that we don't have white sandy beaches and tourist meccas all over our coastal area. We are what we refer to as a working coast. And Christy represents what I would refer to, and you can perfect this, but kind of the industrial chamber of commerce that recognizes the industry that powers the economy down the bayou, and so the South Central Industrial Association is the organization that she represents. So
thank you.
for
I may use that. Thank you. So South Central Industrial Association is a regional association. Tommy's Lamoga is a statewide association. And just by the way, I wanted to back up. Corey, Keefe, and Wendell are both from Lafourche, as is Christine. Actually, we migrated here. I'm from California and Houston. So you can definitely see the difference between South Lafourche dialect and North Lafourche dialect.
And Lafourche is a parish or a county.
Yes,
that,
and it's a very long one, and it follows a bayou. But anyway, so
Cleveland girl here, by the way.
So yes, I mean, I'm not going to take long. A lot of what I was going to say has been said and then echoed again and echoed again. I will say that, Dr. Reed, you touched on it. Corey Keefe, you put an exclamation point on it. It all comes back to the people. Without the people, then there is no need for the levies, or there's no need for all of it without the people. I will say that Colette Hirstuus mentioned, she had a very good visual analogy, and this goes back to lease sales, that lease sales and the industry is like a conveyor belt. So we have all of these lease sales that were lined up forever, and now we don't know when that next lease sale is. Tommy mentioned that there's a plan, but in that plan it says that there can be up to 11 lease sales in the year, or there can be 0. So imagine that conveyor belt with all of these oil and gas leases stopping, and that conveyor belt still continues. What happens? I will say that Tommy and I, our members, we have the majors, we have the third generation service provider down the bayou, we have all of the mom and pops that make the tools and the nuts that Corey spoke about. They are all very, very concerned, and they are all pro all energy. They just want to make sure that we do this in a smart way. Let's all make this together. And Tommy mentioned it, and it's the big buzzword, all of the above. It's not an either or. And I really like that there's energy, climate, and conservation together, because they can sing harmoniously. It's not a one or the other, or one's louder, and so I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm flattered to be amongst such experts, and then all of you, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, and I want to make sure that everything's going in translation. Lease sales, of course, are the efforts that the federal government undertakes to offer up public lands for energy production, generally millions of acres of onshore and offshore. To put in perspective, during the Obama administration at this point in time, we had about 50 lease sales. Under this administration, we effectively have had 0. So Corey talked about the E&P, the exploration and production, and how that basically tells the future, and without lease sales, the future is very, very dismal. Tommy talked about the importance of certainty for industry, and no lease sales really just jeopardizes the ability of their members to be able to predict and really operate or plan or invest for these uncertain times, which perfect person to come do cleanup right now. Martin Port, who's with Shell, who is one of the biggest producers in the onshore and offshore in this area, and really just upstream, downstream, a little bit of everything, and great perspective, and appreciate you being here today, so thanks.
Thanks, I appreciate the opportunity. And I'm actually Dutch by nature, and Wendell, you sound like you're almost Dutch down but I moved here, or I started my career at Shell just a couple weeks before Katrina. And so raised a family here in New Orleans, and I've had the luxury of working many different roles across Shell, including offshore Gulf of Mexico. Currently in the capacity, I'm looking after shipping in our trading arm for all of the Americas. And I truly support really all the points that have been made here today. Great story on the lease sales, et cetera. For me and for Shell, resilience is really starts with the people. We play in an incredibly complex energy system. We play in many different angles on it. Ultimately, the context is shifting faster now than it ever has before, and it requires us working together in different ways than we might have in the past. And so I'm actually really proud to some of the partnerships we have across the room here, including with a big announcement with LSU recently. And that's, to me, what resilience is all about, right? It's about, hey, how do we work together in a different way? How do we respond? How do we create optionality in the system? It starts with the people that allows us to play in the energy space at the pace that society goes, right? And yeah, like I said, we're active participants. We've never been afraid to be leaders in this space. So we were the first people on the shelf, the first people in deep water. Actually, Cognac, first deep water asset, was the first asset I worked on.
I towed it out.
Yep. It's a very famous tow out, right? It's about 1,000
What was Moore's
foot
in
thick.
that line?
A few later. This is still a fixed leg platform and about 1,000 feet of water. And so we've been actively producing offshore Gulf of Mexico for a long time, and we continue to believe that that's going to be with us for the foreseeable future. On top of that, the one note that I have that I wanted to share as well about the Gulf of Mexico is these are actually the lowest carbon intensity oil barrels that we have in our entire portfolio. And so from a Louisiana perspective, I think that's incredibly important to remember when we talk about resiliency in the energy system. So thanks for the opportunity to participate today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Martin, thank you, and I should have covered that earlier. So what he said is actually critically important. So Pierre talked earlier about the LNG export capacity. He talked about the oil export capacity. We're exporting natural gas to about 36 countries around the world out of Louisiana today. We're exporting oil, and it varies, but somewhere between 8 and 12 countries out of Louisiana today. So as we've seen Russia withdraw their energy resources, Louisiana has been able to step in and backfill or fill the voids for our allies around the world. And it's a really important tool for our overall sort of NATO supply chain, or NATO plus supply chain, that we're using the resources we have, they're using the resources they have to prevent economic disruption, which is a very important tool. But something else that I think is so critical, if we're gonna follow science, if we're gonna follow data, if we're gonna give industry the certainty that they need, Biden administration predicts that energy demand globally is gonna increase 50% over the next 28 years. So, you know, you've heard people say all of the above, and that's something that President Obama used to often say, all of the above. And I think right now what we've been seeing is a none of the above energy strategy, where it's not oil and gas, there's no exploration and production activities, there are no lease sales, they're stopping the mining of renewable energy resources that are needed, or critical minerals that are needed for renewable energy production. I mean, it's just, and that is what is causing this growing divide between supply and demand that is manifest in higher prices, with a doubling of gasoline prices, a tripling of natural gas. But so if we're going to acknowledge the science, the data that says that global energy demand is going to increase 50%, and if we have the lowest carbon emissions per unit of energy, some of the lowest in the world here in South Louisiana, why in the world aren't we using that to supply what we know is going to be a growing global demand, including up to 80% growth in global energy and natural gas demand for developing countries. Why not meet it with our resources if it's the cleanest? But let me back up. We have this room for about another 30 minutes. We're planning on taking a break, but how about if we do a working break? And those of you who want to hit the restroom, water, what have you, have at it. We're going to go ahead and roll straight into Q&A. And I want to go ahead and see if any of y'all have things, or if you want me to do an icebreaker, I'm happy to do that as well. So Debbie, please.
Yeah, I think Corey said that under the Trump administration, there weren't any lease sales as well. Did I hear that accurate?
We don't know. Nobody knows what Corey said.
It's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that the last robust lease sale was during the Obama era. I think we had one that went over $5 billion.
Okay.
You have not seen a lease sale go over 500 million in over 10 years.
Okay, all right.
That's what I'm saying. And as much as we would have liked for him to have been more vocal about his energy program for the Gulf of Mexico, every time we bring up that question, it was like everyone would tiptoe around the answer and not want to talk about that. So the next president that runs, I'm not supporting him unless he has specific answers for what that means for Louisiana.
Okay.
You know, and that's my point. And my point is that without that, our production is going to drop off if they don't do something about increasing the lease sales. And what everyone needs to understand is that the companies that make these major investments are competing worldwide. And this country does not compete for that because they don't know how to do it. They should be more attracting these companies. And these companies are the companies that are investing the billions into the renewable sector. Shell, Chevron, BP, Dominion, Equinor, those are the big dollars behind the renewable stuff. So it's not like there's a fight between them. They're in the energy business. It's not important to them if it's wind or oil and gas. They're gonna have fun.
Yeah.
Well, that's all I'm saying. That since McCarthy, it dropped off with Obama. It didn't change during Trump, and it's nothing nullified. So,
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Congressman Long?
Joe Barton was congressman from Texas, and he was on Energy and Commerce with myself and with Debbie Lesko here. And he worked tirelessly for years, and then the last 5 or 6 years of that effort, I worked alongside him to be able to export LNG. And that was a battle to get that done. But through Joe Barton's efforts and the efforts of people on Energy and Commerce, we finally accomplished that. And I think that a lot of you probably know Joe, but he was the lead dog on the thing that got it done. And if I was gonna recommend a stock to buy today, I would recommend buying stock in Garrett Graves. This guy, you already know what, you don't know how fortunate you are. I mean, how many congressmen, how many congressmen could put together a group of people like this? I mean, I've been in Congress 12 years. I've been to a lot of roundtables. I was one of the most traveled members of Congress for several years. And I'd go anywhere at the drop of a hat all over the world, but all right, I'm a 20 when you get 5, 5, 35, $40 down 5. But no, seriously, I mean, it's such an honor to be able to be included in this group and to get the invite from Garrett. But I mean, I'm just not doing hyperbole here. This is really an impressive group and effort that this guy's put forward, and I hope you guys appreciate what you have. I don't know where he's going, but he's going places that I want to have some stock in.
You do. Thank you. Congressman Smith.
Thank you very much. And Billy brings up, I think, a great point. I'm not on the Energy and Commerce Committee. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee, but happily look to the Energy and Commerce Committee to lift that export ban. And I think the results of that speak for themselves for consumers. And I think there's a lot to take away from that economically. And so sorting through all this, though, workforce issues are so important. I mean, the pressures on inflation and supply chain and so forth, that really circle back to workforce issues. I'm concerned that there are folks who left the workforce in 2008 who have not returned. And so I appreciate the community colleges we've got a very vibrant system in Nebraska that I like to work with to, that really step in and fill the gap. So I want to say thank you for your efforts, and that agility cannot be emphasized enough, especially with resilience and getting back to where we need to be and to innovate for the future. All these job vacancies that exist, and there's that frustration. I know that you're in the middle of that. So realizing that education as a whole is community colleges and other more traditional higher education that's not as agile. How do you? And I don't want to expect you to throw colleagues under the bus. What do you think we can do to get things going more relating to the workforce across the skill spectrum? And student debt, now that's becoming so political too. We've got a lot of moving parts here that we have to keep an eye on. What suggestions might you have?
I think that part of it goes to the relationships between 2-year and 4-year and the recognition of the value of both. We've been doing a deep dive into competency-based education as of late. And what I think where we've taken a misstep or a step off the road is this idea that a traditional semester in 16 weeks means that you have, mastered something in a way. And, the conversation we had yesterday was, if you get a C, you get 70%, that still means 30% of the content you didn't learn. But yet we've moved you on to that next level. And so some of what we do at the community college, obviously, is either industry-based credentials or shorter term degrees or credentials, right? But I find that there is not an established way to recognize that at the levels as you move up. So if I have someone, for instance, who is a mariner, right, maybe has a pilot's license or has tankerman's credential or whatever, how can we recognize that work and life experience as well as the education that's gone into that at that next level? One of the most amazing examples I can think of, I went and visited a welding class, and those welding students were doing higher level math than I had any clue about, right? I stood there and was just like, and here's the thing, if I would have asked any of them if they were good at math, they probably would have said no. But because it was applied in a way, so I think we have to re-envision that. But is there a way for that student who graduates from me with an associate's degree in welding to go on to the bachelor's degree and somebody to say, you are gonna get credit for calculus or geometry or whatever that is, because I think there's this disconnect of what it means to be educated in a traditional model. And so finding ways, I think, to engage 2-year and 4-year, first of all, in those conversations about how do you assess ability and competency and skills and knowledge, and then how can you make that applicable to degrees so that people have an opportunity to continue on that journey without having to restart. I'm sure we all have people we know who transferred or stopped out and restarted, and they found themselves back at square one or having to repeat courses that they already took. So, we have to find ways to allow individuals to have their life going on, as well as engage in our educational system. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Strickland.
A couple of things I want to mention. Garrett and I fought long and hard to get the fishing seasons back in the Gulf of Mexico, and I say this, and it wouldn't have happened without him, and I probably could have used a little different tone and demeanor. I'm Baptist, but I may need to go to confession while I'm here in Louisiana for some of the people know of. But this is I want to bring this up because there are 435 members of the House of Representatives, of the U.S. House of Representatives. you have 6. And even if all 6 from Louisiana agreed on what the best course of action was for your state, and if both of your senators agreed on what the best course of action was for your state, you've still got a federal agency that has more control over what's right for Louisiana than 100% of the congressional delegation. And that's where we have got to do a better job in DC of letting go of the control and letting it get back to people who, whether they're Democrat or Republican, can look at an issue and apply common sense to it and say, we can get to a 90% solution. And that 90% solution, there's gonna be some work and there's gonna be some risk in it, but something's gonna get done, where if you leave it up to a federal bureaucracy in Washington, DC, they want a 100% risk-free solution, which does not exist in this world. It just doesn't. As for energy, I think you're exactly right with what you said. It's not right for it. We don't have the technology to do it without oil and gas and diesel. And let me tell you, there are a few things you need every day of your life. One of them is food. We farm with diesel. We farmed with diesel yesterday. We farmed with diesel today. We're gonna farm with diesel tomorrow. That's all there is to it. You're not gonna create a battery-operated tractor over the next couple of decades that's gonna be light enough, but strong enough that you can actually pull the implements to grow the food that not just America, but the world needs. And so it seems to me that what we need to do in Washington, D.C. is to accept the facts, stop changing the rules, and send the control and the opportunities for the solutions down to the state and local people. And I think we'll get a lot further, a lot faster if we do that than if we let these overeducated people in DC that don't know how to weld control what we're doing. So I'll take a 2-year technical grad over a PhD any day of the week.
And for the record, I'd like to state that Corey and I have the same alma mater, so we went to the same college.
I know somebody else too.
Thanks, Austin. I want to ask you all, and maybe some of the overly educated folks, number one, just to help all of you understand, we can talk about hurricanes all day long, and y'all aren't from an area that's as susceptible, so you're like, yeah, whatever.
In Arizona.
But let me connect the dots though. Hurricane Katrina alone was $150 billion of your taxpayer dollars. $150 billion, Katrina and Rita in 2005. Harvey, Irma, Maria in 2017, I'm trying to remember the number, was it about 300? I think it was around 300 billion for those hurricanes, and largely Texas, to some degree Florida, but absolutely in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So you can say it doesn't affect you. I promise it affects you. And taking it a step further, I mentioned to y'all that 5 of the top 15 ports in America, right here in South Louisiana, I think Pierre talked about, this river was shut down for Hurricane Ida, which is 65% of the grains in the Midwest. You could take every truck and rail car, you don't have the capacity to replicate the river. You don't. Nothing backfills it. And for Hurricane Katrina, if I remember right, river was shut down for 4 or 5 days. I don't know if you remember. It was shut down for 4 or 5 days for Hurricane Katrina. So you can't replace the capacity. So let me just say it again. Whether it's a hurricane, it affects you, but of course everybody has disasters: forest fires, snowstorms, tornadoes, earthquakes, or other types of disasters. The forest fires have been a hot topic out west lately. But talking to y'all, y'all sort of touched on the peripheral. Jasmine, you did as well. Risk rating 2.0, which is the new flood insurance actuarial method, supposedly actuarial method, that is taking flood insurance rates. We've seen them go from $560 a year, to $8,000 a year. For the same house, you can imagine a retiree fixed income, you can't do it. It devalues the home. Denise talked about the schools or police stations or banks leaving. This isn't a deliberate strategy to say, hey, we're gonna relocate your community. It's actually a non-deliberate or an undeliberate, it's sort of our modern day Trail of Tears, and that you're forcing people without an actual strategy through attrition, through just depriving them of the resources that they need. So here's the question. We have things like infrastructure we could be building, whether it's green or gray. We have things like relocation programs. We have all sorts of tools in the tool chest that are available to us to help sustain these communities. Can you just talk in a way that translates to the risk or the hazards that other folks will be experiencing, and how you look at this, and how, and I'm gonna put words in your mouth, and please push back, Denise, I know you will if you don't agree. But is it the right thing to do to just sort of force relocation or evacuation through attrition, force a trail of tears through attrition, or by deprivation of services? Or is it better to actually step in and say, hey, let's figure out how to do this deliberately, or how to actually protect you and make you resilient?
Well, clearly, we have, there are things that can be done. There are things that can be done. It's not going to stop the tornado. It's not going to stop the hurricane. And of course, we are lucky to some extent in that for hurricane storm surge, when the water pushes in from the Gulf of Mexico, there are things we can do to stop it, impacting our houses. This is the kind of levee system that Wendell runs. You can't stop the tornado, right? There's not much you can do about wildfire once it's got started, right? And so the idea of how do we anticipate that these are going to happen? It's not if it's going to happen. It's when it's going to happen. I mean, I think everybody who lives down here on the coast, we think like that, and you probably think like that about wildfires and droughts and tornadoes too. So if we can, anticipate those things, that every time it happens, we go, oh, we should have done, if we can anticipate those, like hardening the electricity has come up a number of times, making sure that some of the things that were done since Katrina about emergency responders communications, for instance, there's been a lot of development on that, in the last 20 years, but I'm sure it can probably be improved with current technology. But helping people see a future for themselves, I think, is the key thing. Whether that future is at the place where they are now, or at the place or where they grew up, or whatever, but giving them something that they can value and look forward to and build towards, recognizing that these events are still going to come in and kind of, really cause some disruption to them. So helping them recover quicker, giving them, incentivizing people to build, appropriately and be responsive, but also kind of not overly penalizing them for doing the right thing, which I think is the example that we have from the flood insurance issue. My house is 10 feet off the ground. I built my house 22 years ago, and we built it 10 feet off the ground, right? I have flood insurance, right? Because it's the right thing to do. And when this risk rating 2.0 was going to come out, I thought, I'm going to be one of that percentage where the flood insurance is going to go down. No, it didn't. Mine went up the maximum 18% that all of my neighbors did, right? And so, we're doing the right thing, right? We're doing as much as... What else can you do apart from build your house 10 feet off the ground?
And has your house ever flooded?
No. No, but that doesn't mean to say that it's not going to happen again.
No, you laugh at it, but it's insane what they're doing. Places that have not flooded, the houses have been there for 30 years, and yet they don't handle repetitive floods right. We wouldn't be talking about this issue. They don't handle repetitive floods and the amount of money they pay to write your loans. We're just manipulating what's good business with those people. We'd be in the black.
Right, well, to my point is this. How come it is that we spending money, especially down here, we pass local taxes, the state matches that money, and it took forever to get the federal government to actually come to the door to start participating, all right? But we paying to mitigate those damages and still being punished, all right? Yeah. Another thing, the biggest thing that I got a call in my skin about is we actually did a study on FEMA when Roy Wright was in there. And Roy showed us a sampling that they did that showed that only 49% of policy of homes or structures that were required to follow the mandate for having insurance were actually participating in the program. So half or not. So what FEMA's doing is saying, well, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna ignore these stupid people who's getting away with it. We're gonna punish the good paying customers. We're gonna make them pay more. That's what they're doing. If I ran a business like that, I wouldn't be in business long. I talked to our underwriters in London about this. We drank enough scotch that we're giggling like a bunch of little girls. It's like, I can't believe they're not taking that money and reinvesting it into the reinsurance market.
You know, can I just
Hello?
say here that we also, in Louisiana, we have a rapidly emerging issue, not just on flood insurance, but on homeowners insurance. And really, you know, so I have a, you know, a homeowners policy, right? I have a good homeowners policy, and I have a deductible, whatever it is, $500 or $1,000, just like you all do, right? If it's a named storm that causes damage, not water damage, roof or anything like that, my deductible goes up from that to 5% of my property value. And that's, you have to pay that out of pocket. FEMA does not reimburse her insurance deductibles.
Nope.
So, I mean, I don't know what that's like for wildfires, I don't know what that's like for tornadoes, but if it's happening for hurricanes, it's coming to you. And just, we are really gonna be in an insurance crisis. And the other point that I didn't make right at the beginning, but it was very clear as we went round, right? It's about the people, but we need people to live on the coast, to support these important industries. People, I mean, how many times do people come down here and they say, you should all just move? It's not like that, right? If you want fish, if you want shrimp, if you want oil and gas, if you want renewable energy from Louisiana in the future, we have to have people living down here.
Look, all the great deltas of the world have two things in common: great opportunity and great risk. And the people that manage the opportunity to take care of the risk, like the Netherlands, they're successful. Places that don't suffer from it. But we are the delta, we're the continental delta. It's a different place. Garrett sent me to Amsterdam, to the Aquaterra, where I met with other great deltas. And people are there in droves because it is a place. Civilization started Euphrates and Tigris. It was a delta. People think, stay away from water, it's bad. No, it's a double-edged sword, and we need one of those edges. We can't get away from it. Every great population is near a lot of fresh water.
But they also built a system that was built instead of a 10-to-1 safety ratio, 1,000-to-1 safety ratio, which we can't afford here. But one thing I want to point out that I might have said another word to you. We had an executive committee meeting of the levy districts in February. And a unanimous vote was for me to petition the Attorney General to sue him, because what they're doing is a taking. They're devaluating homes. Some people owe more on their homes than what they worth now. You know, well, how do you think the bankers are gonna look at this? Who's supposed to be enforcing the flood insurance stuff, and some of them are not. But one thing we did find out in this study is that, you know how Louisiana's like the worst in a lot of things? One of the things we best at is implementing the flood insurance program in Louisiana. Louisiana's #1 in the country. I can't tell y'all, there was another friend of ours that we had that was on this committee that was against this, and it was worse. He didn't like us telling him that, but you know, he's also not a congressman anymore. So I'll let him explain that. But the point is that we've been, look, Inc. and the levy boards have been in DC for years fighting with this thing, and Garrett's been right there with us all along the way, swinging and punching at this thing. It's about the people again. We're resilient. I'm not giving up. I'm not giving up. And I might spend every nickel I've got left in my pocket and every ounce of air I can breathe between cigarettes to go up there, and I'm gonna swing at them till I can't go no more. I mean, that's just how it is. It's ridiculous. We gonna sue FEMA, and I can promise you, we are pressing the AG on that, and because it couldn't happen at the beginning of the year because the policies were just all being issued.
Right.
But now that it's through the year and everybody got their renewals in, well, there's people that are mad. you know, and I've talked to enough bankers to know that they're getting calls from people that have debt, and they're saying, my house is not worth as much as the mortgage. We either need to refinance it, revalue it, or something, they need something, well, nobody's happy about taking those hits. So before the end of the year, I'm gonna find out, the AG may turn us down, I don't know.
A few of you mentioned GOMESA, Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act. We've talked about the lack of lease sales. Does somebody want to talk about the relationship between those two things and just help people here understand why lease sales are important, not just for an energy perspective, but also for resilience?
Well, we started the whole issue was about the federal government averaged from 1995 to today about $6 billion a year. On land, they share federal.
$6 billion a year in revenues from
And leases,
from
leases and revenues.
energy production in the offshore for the federal government.
And $6 billion, and if the same thing happened inside a state's border or in government land, the state gets 50% because there's some infrastructure issues with that. With us, it wasn't in our state because it was offshore, but the infrastructure aspect of it, I gotta spend another $10 million to move pipelines, because those pipelines are coming through. Now look, we don't complain about that aspect, but it's a cost to us. We have more erosions. I have to go re-establish some marsh to help at the total levy because of the work it takes to produce offshore. It's fair to get a fair shake. We had to, our levy district, which is built of people who support the oil industry, voted to go ahead and send a letter to the governor asking her to object to the next lease sale, not because we didn't want the lease sale, but we need a fair share of that money to take care of the problems that were being caused. We believe in being fair, and we were not being treated fairly. We did sue, and the TRO was rejected because we hadn't had the damage yet, but he went on for another 30 pages saying how we had some standing. Landrew picked it up, and it was a Blanco versus Burton. It was a lawsuit, and now we're getting 37%. But it's new, not just a portion of the old. So this is very important, and we have dedicated that money to take care of our coast, which is damaged. It's just the most sensible. Other states don't tie that money to anything. They go anywhere. We have tied it so that coast that helps produce the oil, we help repair it so we can keep on doing what we do.
And I think, and that's the importance, because, you know, as we see lease sales continue to not get issued, if the production doesn't happen, well, then the money doesn't flow as well. And you have to look at the energy assets in Louisiana's coast and the offshore waters as national assets. They are absolutely national assets that are benefiting the country. And we talked about the gas production, they're benefiting the world. So it's the ability for Louisiana to invest and take care of itself. You know, it's very much a self-maintenance process, if you will, that benefits everyone. And those fights were real, and they needed to happen because there is a large amount of infrastructure. As you're flying down tomorrow, Garrett can show you, they've just begun to break ground on the final leg of an elevated highway that goes down to Port Fourchon that is going to eliminate a lot of the risk that comes during not just direct hits from storms, but a storm in the Gulf of Mexico raises water for hundreds of miles. And you had the main access road down to Port Fourchon, which is taking, you know, supporting 90% of offshore production. It would flood as soon as those waters come up. The last leg of this elevated highway has just begun construction. It's all because of that money that is now coming back to Louisiana from offshore production. And it's a partnership of local, state, federal government, the industry. Louisiana will do its part to self-maintain, if you will, but it can only do it if the production happens. If we stop the business activity, then everything else is very quick, starts to fall.
Yeah, 'cause
Another interesting point about the lease sale that was avoided is very ironic. And if you would look at the actual blocks that were bid on in this last lease sale, Exxon submitted bids for a very large contiguous lease block acreage that was equidistant from the coast. And in the oil and gas business, we call that go pasture. It had no productive value. They would admit it as such. Clearly, that was for purposes of carbon sequestration. Near industrial corridors, much like Louisiana, and we talked about the river, 2/3 of the CO2 emissions for the state of Louisiana are industrial. We need to open this back up so that we can now convert some of these leases to carbon sequestration. And that's exactly what Exxon, I'm sure, again, not public, was clearly gonna do. And we avoided that. But that would create shelf activity, pipelines, construction, and meet the needs of decreasing emissions. So that's a great opportunity right there. It goes back to my story of there's a benefit of both. You can do both of these things.
Pierre, don't you worry, your secret's safe with us.
I'll make this say briefly, Gary, in terms of how you support resiliency efforts, I mean, we're talking about Go Mesa, which is a dedicated funding stream that not only has given the state the ability to put a plan together, knowing there's funding there, but it allowed the private sector to come around and make investments, knowing that the money would be there. We also have an earlier iteration of that, where we got a portion of with a small engine fuel for the QIPRA Act, that, is really an earlier iteration of this. So just something to think about as y'all kind of taking this back and thinking about, hey, how do we fund resiliency? How do we get the private sector engaged? Those dedicated funding streams are just so valuable.
Yeah, just to put some little definition on it. So since the 1920s, Wendell talked about this for onshore energy production on federal lands. States that produce, on federal lands, if energy is produced within the bounds of your state, the state gets 50% of the money, no strings attached. You can do whatever you want. Wyoming, New Mexico have received billions and billions of dollars from energy production on federal lands within their states. But all states get it. An additional 40% goes into the reclamation fund for water projects in the western states. For offshore production, the state of Louisiana for decades, for over 50 years, got zero. And effectively beginning in 2016, we started getting 37.5% of only new production. And so just to put in perspective, I think I did the math one time and it was 0.04% of all the revenue we were getting back. So it was a very small overall percentage, not 50%, but a small percent. But with no production, with no lease sales, we also don't get the resiliency investments under our state's constitution. Every penny that comes in has to be invested back into the coastal master plan to improve resilience of these same communities. Look, I know we're out of time, and I know that Wendell's not always the most brief, but Wendell, I want to ask you a question. I know, I don't want to confuse you with somebody else, but I want to ask you a question. And when Hurricane Ida was bearing down on us, we get all these phone calls from the media saying, "Aren't you worried about the levee system around New Orleans?" I said, no. Like, how can you be so sure? It's like, I'm telling you, it's not going anywhere. And you had a federal levee system similar to the one in the greater New Orleans area that you recognized needed improvements. The federal government was too slow, too expensive. You built your own additional floodgate to create a lock structure that we're going to see tomorrow. You were out there raising the height of your levee. The Corps of Engineers is sending you cease and desist letters. You're on the phone with them saying, "No, I don't know what you're talking about," as you're driving the bulldozer to build the highway. But I want to hear you just briefly talk about the results of investment versus just this strategy of complacency or not doing anything.
Well, to start off, when Gingrich and Clinton were fighting, we had some federal money coming in, it stopped.
Yeah.
So we doubled the millage tax on our people from 5 mills to 10 mills.
They have both a property tax and a sales
Well,
tax.
but the sales tax came later. For Katrina, we were always told that all of the authorized projects they did a new 100-year storm because of Katrina. FEMA decided to do that. Well, we thought we would be in the fourth emergency supplemental. We were told that. Fourth supplemental comes around and myself and Lieutenant Governor Nunez are meeting in the Corps office. He says, "No, you're not included. We're out in the cold." So they're gonna spend $14 billion for the 5 parishes in New Orleans, and we get nothing. I went back to our people and asked for 1 penny sales tax. It put us the highest sales tax in the area. We had 82% approval. With that consistency, from that time on, if we had not passed those taxes, if the people hadn't passed the tax themselves, because the state has helped, but it's been periodically. The feds have helped, but periodically. The only consistency is our local taxes. We didn't flood, but we needed every inch of that levee to survive Ida, and we did. I guarantee you we would have lost hundreds of lives, if not 1,000. But it worked, and we did, the thing that the Corps, after getting past the shock of Katrina and just getting so defensive about everything, they're actually moving to more common sense approach to levees. Okay, we say levees. Levees are an earthen structure. No earthen structure truly failed. Some were eaten away because they were overtopped. We had true failures with the walls, yet the Corps doubled the cost, put the levees on steroids. And I believe, in my research, that the original levees, which are based on river levees to build hurricane levees, that they were over-designed to begin with. And finally, the Corps is talking about doing a study to check that out. They never calibrated the design for river levees to do hurricane levees. And it's just a matter, for us, it's about not flooding. The focus, don't let water get into houses and buildings. For the Corps, it's more building the levee more than the flooding. And that's why you lose, what is the true focus of what we're doing? You're missing the point. Bridge over the River Kwai type of thing. You know, you're missing the point. What is your job?
Yeah.
Don't do these other things, focus, and then this will work out. We wouldn't be on opposite sides. And look, the local guys that I dealt with the Corps, they understood. They just gotta do with the, you know, but the orders come from Washington.
The same thing happened too with the Morganza system.
Yeah, we pay tax as well, right, and it's, yeah.
The Morganza system, we had a levee system that goes from all across Terrebonne Parish through South Lafourche and into North Lafourche. And with Wendell's district convinced Terrebonne to pass a sales tax, because we all have millages. Then they convinced us to pass one too, so we created a tax district of millage and sales tax.
For North Lafourche, right?
North Lafourche,
Right.
South
So we've all
Lafourche, and
got
Terrebonne.
taxing ourselves on that.
Well, North Lafourche, Terrebonne, and South Lafourche, all three of them do, okay? So that's when we got the era of the Corps, and when they did the post-authorization change, they brought Morganza into North Lafourche, I started studying it, and I called Wendell, and I called Reggie, and I said, how much of this system is built? He said, about a third. I said, how much has been spent? About 900 million. So if a third's been built for 900 million, why the price tag on it's 13 billion? Because after Katrina, the Corps freaked out and changed the design on it and built this levee that could stop Godzilla from burning through a building.
Well, again, it went from $800 million estimate to 10 billion.
Same exact project went from, I mean, it was $586 million in 1999. It went to same exact project under the new Corps gold-plated standards went to $11 billion in 2014.
And now it's down to
Yeah.
3.5.
Well, now, because we did a value engineering analysis, we think we've got it back to under 3.
Master plan cost is 3.5.
What's that?
Master plan cost is about
Yeah.
3.5.
But just to give some numbers, I'm building levees for $4 to $10 a cubic yard. Here in New Orleans after Katrina, they were spending over $50 a cubic yard. But still, the way the Corps is, again, they've gotten, I think they're moving in a
It's
good
a lot
direction.
better now.
Right. We gotta.
We need some alcohol if we're gonna talk about the Corps.
We gotta.
I'm on the armed service committee.
Look, I don't want anybody here talking bad about the Corps.
Tell me first.
They're all laughing because they know that. But look, I'm gonna summarize what Wendell will say as we close. And if Wendell had not broken the rules, if he had not broken the rules and said to heck with the federal government, to heck with your rules, the Corps of Engineers, and gone and built his levees higher, his community would have flooded. That's the truth right there. And
But I was working on the intent of the rule. You know, if I was gonna go to court, and the judge said, why did you break the rules? Because the intent of what they were just too dumb to understand how to get it done.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
But really, he saved lives, he saved property as a result of his allegedly questionable, possibly illegal actions.
Well, do the right thing.
I want to thank everybody for being here and providing input today. We do need a break because we need to give up the room, but I hope we have an opportunity to continue talking, and I think it's been a great scene center for these folks who just landed, so thank you very much.
I'm from Corey for president.